Good evening. It's my special pleasure to have Senator Peter Domenici as my guest on Talk It Over this evening. We're bringing you this show from Washington, D.C. Well, of course, I have to start by asking you, what is happening with the budget?
Well, in the United States Senate, we're finished with the first round. We've approved a budget here. Now we have to wait and see what the U.S. House does, then go to conference and see what the final result between the differences there, what the result will be, and then that'll be the guideline for the year. In our budget, we have an added feature. We have some mandatory cuts. Many budgets just have guidelines. We have a number of programs that we think have to be reformed, and the committees that have them have been mandated to do that. So at this point, we have a budget in the United States Senate. While it's not exactly what I want, it's a dramatic improvement over where we were without it. The deficit that we started with in 1983 would have been 182. We've got that down to 112, 115. The deficit in 84 would have been about 216. We have that down to about 75 or 80. And the deficit in 1985 would have been 233 billion. We have that down to about 49. Now that's not where we would like it. Excuse me, we have it down to about 64 in that last year. That's not where we would like it, but we are confident that since it's coming down, we have left the incentives in for tax reduction. There will be some tax increases, but we've left about 75% of the tax cuts in quantity. We're confident that if that was passed and all the legislation required for implementing it adopted, that interest would begin to come down and stay down. That deficit is going to be reduced within the next 8 or 9 months significantly when the reform measures that are necessary to keep Social Security from going insolvent are adopted. And that will either be through reforming the program or raising some Social Security taxes, whichever Congress desires. In any event, it will affect those deficits because that 1985 deficit reflects an insolvent Social Security fund, so it's bigger than it would be but for Social Security. So if it's reformed, $17 or $18 billion worth of change, that deficit will be reduced by that amount. It's an interesting time we live in. Many economic changes. Very tough to get budgets prepared. This is an improvement over what the President sent to us a few months ago. His deficits would have been much larger. He knows that now. He supports this. It's an improvement over doing nothing. And when you consider that it's an election year and they're willing to bite off that much, that is reducing programs significantly and cutting defense a little bit over what it would otherwise be, and asking for additional taxes over the 3 years, that's a pretty big step.
You mentioned that the President will accept this. In Newsweek, they said that you decided on what was acceptable, what you could go for, and then you went to talk the President into it. Now, how does one put pressure on the President? What do you say to the President to get him to compromise a little bit?
Well, you see, we went through this so-called Gang of 17 negotiating for a month. That's what the President called the group that worked for about a month, including House, Senate members, and members of his cabinet and staff. And then he met with Tip O'Neill and others on the Hill, and it fell apart. Well, a number of things were accomplished there, some starting points. The President made some proposals at his meeting. So my budget committee had two responsibilities. Ultimately, to pass a bill on the floor, a resolution, that was the best we could get out of the U.S. Senate. But before you can do that, you have to pass a resolution out of the committee. And the committee was very split. And the President's budget was not acceptable to anybody on the committee, and by then the President had abandoned his budget for all intents and purposes, his original budget. So knowing that I have a very serious responsibility, as I've just described it, I had come up with a budget that I could pass. And that was hard work, took us a long time. Basically, it would have froze everything that we can really freeze for 1 year. Nobody would have gotten any increases and nobody would have got hurt for 1 year. But that meant that Social Security and all pensions would receive no increases for a year. They would not be changed, but they wouldn't get any increases. I had that ready to go and I could pass it. And so I informed the White House that that's what a Republican committee was going to report. They started working with the President because he didn't like parts of that, and because a lot of politicians around didn't like parts of it, and a lot of House members didn't like parts of it, especially freezing Social Security and other pensions for 1 year. So I said, I'll just have to do this one, and then when it gets to the floor of the Senate, you'll have to decide what you want to do. That brought a compromise, the compromise that we reported out of committee that stirred everybody in the country up, where we said, okay, we'll freeze everybody that has federal pensions for a year, but for Social Security we won't. What we'll do is we'll order that it be made solvent before the year is out, that Congress take whatever actions necessary to make it solvent, and we estimate that there will have to be $40 billion worth of changes to do that, either tax increases, deferrals of increases, some reform, and then we said if you put that $40 billion in, that would take away from the deficit, and we had a budget. And the President said, okay, as long as you don't take away the pension increase until that commission reports and all that work's done, which will be done before the year ends, okay. So he went with it, and we produced that kind of budget.
Okay, we'll be back in 1 moment.
Consumer Price Index.
Okay. My guest this evening is Senator Pete Domenici, chairperson of the Senate Budget Committee. That committee...
They don't call me that, though.
They call you chairman.
Yeah, they call me Mr. Chairman. You're
Mr.
right.
Chairman, okay.
I haven't heard the other referred to me very often. I guess you're right.
You mentioned that you knew that you could get this out of your committee and took it to the President. Do you also work or have inklings of what will fly with your counterparts in the House, or do you only zero in on the Senate and then their problem is their problem, and then the chips have to be put together somehow?
Well, there isn't any hard and fast rule with reference to how far you go in analyzing what you can do. There are occasions in the legislative process when you try to find out precisely what your counterparts in the committee in the House, how far they'll go, what they're looking at, what they'll do. Frankly, in this case, I had enough trouble trying to discern and see daylight in getting a budget out of the United States Senate Budget Committee that we had a chance of passing on the floor, that I left it up to others. Our own leader, who's done a marvelous job, Senator Baker, White House liaison with the Congress, Jim Baker, the White House staff man that handles it for the President. I was not trying to find out what they could do. We have time in conference later on. They produce a different budget. We can resolve some differences. My goal was to get a budget that made economic sense, even if it was not what I wanted. You got to be part of a team up here. I would have wanted a more strict budget that would get the deficits down more. And I was kind of willing to cut a little more in defense, to take and freeze everything for 1 year instead of just freeze part of the government. And I was willing to, when you're finished with that exercise, raise a little more in taxes to get that deficit down more. So mine was slightly different. But basically there's an issue that we ought to talk about that I think is a very exciting one for this country, and our people are going to face it sooner or later. No way to avoid it. And it has to do with the status of 4 programs in this country: Social Security and Medicare, which is the health program that goes with it, the veterans' pensions, and then all of the government's the pensions for federal employees, both military retirees and civilian retirees. Now there's a myth abreast in the country. In fact, some I must say from AFL-CIO and some of their counterparts and some offshoots of the Democratic Party have run ads indicating that those pension programs, in particular Social Security, have a contractual right to an increase every year. And that's called a Consumer Price Index add-on.
Sort of like the God-given rights in the Constitution, huh?
And when you see this word bandied around, COLA, cost of living adjustment, they run ads saying that these 36 million Americans on Social Security, plus about 4 or 5 million that are on federal employee retirement or military retirement, that somehow or another Congress gave us this as a written contract in the law. Well, I think it'd be interesting just to give your viewers a history of this and what's happened to it and why it's going to be fixed and why it is putting so much pressure on their programs that the whole programs are going to be looked at and reformed because they're going to go broke. In 1971, when a gentleman that many people will still remember, named Wilbur Mills, was chairman of a big taxing committee in the U.S. House, decided to run for president. It was an abortive campaign, but he decided that since he had written all the tax laws and the Social Security laws, that it'd be a very good campaign deal to run around the country and tell the Social Security people that he was for giving them all a raise. Now, who's not for giving Social Security a raise? So it was a trust fund. You work and put money in it, and your boss puts some in, and you keep saving it, and then you figure how many people need it, and you hope you got enough saved up here, you see, so you can pay it. Well, it was very plush because we had lots of workers. They were all young. So there were 16 to 25 people putting in for every one retiring. So you will know we're now down to 3.5 to 1. We'll soon be to 2 to 1. But anyhow, so he went out and said, let's give everybody a 20% increase. Well, who could turn that down?
Yeah, I'd like 20%.
They did. The next year, somebody in Congress said, well, old Wilbur didn't get elected president, but we ought to give him another increase. So we voted in 10. Who could deny 10? So then inflation was about 2 or 3 at that point, but that's all right.
So then it was really quite a bit more than 10.
It was a very nice add-on, and nobody, please, this senator is not saying they're getting rich.
No.
I'm just telling you the concept that money was supposed to be over here to pay for it.
That money was supposed to be invested well, wasn't it?
And it was being invested fairly well in those days.
What does the government invest those funds in?
Let me finish this and I'll come back and tell you.
Okay.
So we went 10%, see, the next year. And then the following year, that's another election year, right, in the House, because they run every 2 years. Somebody said, gee, wouldn't it be nice this year we'll give them 15. So they gave them 15%. Well, then they really got scared and said, you know, this is really kind of crazy because if we do that every year, it'll be bankrupt in no time. So they said, let's just put it on what I choose to call automatic pilot. Now, mind you, Social Security went in under Roosevelt, right? And this would be about 1974 or 5. We said we'll put it on automatic increase every year, the cost, Consumer Price Index add-on, unless Congress wants to do something different each year. Now, I asked the first question. If that happened then, how could that have been an agreement for all these years? You know, it couldn't be. But for the past 11 years, what I've just described to you, ma'am, means that our Social Security checks have gone up 205% average. Now let's repeat again. I'm not, I don't think the poorer Social Security people are getting rich on this. I think you would say, gee, I'm glad we could pay 205. But the point is, this trust fund is going broke because that's a lot of increase.
And the earners have not gone up 205%.
Now you got it. They went up 120 in the same time, 113 to 120. So there's, you know, that huge difference, 80 to 85% difference. And this is where the money comes from, the earners. But remember, I told you when it was very plush, there were 16, 17 workers for one. Thank God we've done some great things in health. Our people are living longer. We've mechanized. We don't use as many people to work. But now we're down to 2.5 to 3 workers for one, plus what you and I have described. This automatic pilot, plus 20, 15, and 10, 205% increase. And nobody wants to really tell the senior citizens, because there's 36 million of them, that this cannot continue much longer. Even with the huge new Social Security taxes that all of you are paying, and that all the constituents write about and say, I mean, I'm paying so much for Social Security, is it going to be there when I retire? That isn't enough to pay for this big increase. Now, we did basically the same for all our retirees. The federal retirees, we gave them twice-a-year indexation for a while. And let's just not talk about the details, other than to give you an example. If we would have said to all of our pensioners, we love you, your trust fund's going broke, would you wait 1 year without an increase? Just 1 year. We aren't taking any of you off the rolls. We're not reforming your program. Just wait 1 year. Do you have any idea how much that would have saved in 1 year?
Made the whole thing solvent again?
You got it. 1 year. $17 billion in 1 year. And because you save it in 1 year by just freezing it, you save a lot the next and the next, because you see once you bill that into the check, it stays in. So you would save 17, 15, and 15 over 3 years. Now they would say, why should you save that in a budget? It's ours. No. First of all, if the Social Security fund is going broke, where are we going to get the money? So we have one big budget for America, so we're just trying to tell the truth. So if you'd have saved it, it would have been there in the budget for you, for the trust, for that fund. Federal employees the same way, veterans the same way. Now, that's...
Can we pause for 1 second? We'll be right back, and we'll find out exactly what the new budget does call for.
On these, and then we'll go on to some other subject you would enjoy.
Okay. Senator Domenici, what did you finally come up with concerning the cost of living increases and the pensioners?
In the budget that we produced, we made the following assumptions. We assumed, number one, that all federal employees' pay would be froze for 1 year, that all federal retirees, be they military or civilian, would be frozen for 1 year. No cuts, but no increases. Railroad retirees will get theirs, and that was voted in on the floor. Social Security will get their 7.4% increase, but we ordered the Congress to make the fund solvent by December 1 of this year, meaning that after this election they will have to come back, go to work, and draw a new law to fix Social Security where it does not run out of money in the next year and in 84 and 85. And said when that work is done, the figures will automatically go into the budget. With reference to military, we cut about $22 billion in the 3 years out of the President's request, which is, everybody here is certain we can live with that. The House is thinking of cutting more. We took that fourth program that I told you a while ago, Medicare, which was growing at 19% a year, and I assure our senior citizens that that is going to have to be reformed dramatically. I don't know how yet. It's just 19% a year with inflation at 3.5%. It's going to go bankrupt also. So we ordered that over a period of 3 years, about $25 billion be reduced in terms of what it will cost. That was estimated to be a program that should take care of everybody at about $7 or $8 billion. It is now up to $50 billion, and estimated in the next 8 or 10 years to be higher than 75 or 80 billion. So it has to be fixed. When we finished all of that, we froze all the other accounts of government more or less at last year's level, and then we told Congress raise $95 billion in taxes over 3 years, which leaves 75% of the big tax cuts in place Pick up 25% of that big package, and that'll get you the budget that I described at the offset.
At the beginning. We'll be right back. Okay, now that we've explained the budget, and we've got that all taken care of in 18 minutes flat, I'd like to ask you how you feel about the new immigration bill that has just come out of the Senate Judiciary Committee that calls for employer sanctions for hiring illegal aliens.
Well, I think you can suspect, and I'm sure my constituents understand, that I haven't had an awful lot of time to look at its details. It'll be my responsibility to do that fairly soon because it'll be coming up here in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I have never been looked with much favor on mandatory employer sanctions. So I'm not going to look with favor on any that have the chance of prejudicing a whole group of citizens. Hispanic Americans, or in some parts of the country they are called Mexicans. In my state we call them Hispanics. They are very concerned that employers may turn them down for work automatically because the immigrant from Mexico is the one you're trying to apprehend, and those who employ them are the ones you're trying to apprehend. And if you penalize employers kind of automatically for hiring them, then there may be an overreaction and they may hire no one of Hispanic or Mexican origin. And so I'm going to look with great care and concern at that. There seems to be a compromise growing which says that very small ma and pa type operations would be exempt from that. I hear that proposal's coming up. I'm going to ask my staff to look at it. That makes a little bit of sense, but generally that's my feeling.
All right. Quickly, I know there's something you're very interested in, and that's the uranium import restrictions. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, quickly, the United States is doing some very dumb things in the area of uranium, just as we did years ago on oil. We have opened the import gates totally to foreign uranium because they can produce it cheaper in Australia and Canada, and we're almost inviting America to become dependent upon them. At the same time, because of the nuclear business being on a downer, as we all know, American uranium mines are closing up, going broke. We will, in a few years, be much too dependent. I passed a bill here in the Senate which has brought complaints from many foreign countries, the State Department, everybody, where the United States Senate said we don't want another situation in uranium like we had on oil. No company that's running a nuclear reactor can use more than 20% foreign uranium. I don't know if it'll stick in the House, but it's caused a lot of people to sit back and wonder if we're going to wake up in 10 or 15 years with no domestic uranium industry.
So you're doing the fore work instead of the back work, like when we got in the oil problem.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
You're welcome.
It's been
great
delightful.
to be with you.
Thank you for joining me on Talk It Over.